how you doing? Today, I'd like to tell you the story of Horace and the running rabbits. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Once upon a time, there was a little cat called Horace. He was mostly black, but he had a white face, a white front, white feet, and there was just a little bit of white at the very tip of his tail. Horace lived in a little town in Wales, in a house that had white walls and a black door, and he lived there with Mummy, Daddy and the baby. The baby had a name, but Horace could never remember what it was, because what he mostly heard was Mummy or Daddy saying, "Horace, be careful of the baby," every time he tried to jump up on its buggy, where it was sort of soft and warm and snuggly. Horace loved places that were soft and warm and snuggly, and indeed he spent most of the day curled up on the sofa asleep, cuddled up against the cushions. This was because he spent most of the night outside playing, usually looking for things he could chase, because all cats love chasing things, balls of wool, bits of string, any small animal they think they could catch. And Horace was no different, except that the thing he really loved to chase was rabbits. He loved the way they would run away all scared, with their little white fluffy tails bobbing up and down. But alas for Horace, he didn't have much chance to chase rabbits because there weren't any near his home. At the bottom of the garden of Horace's house, there was a hedge, and the other side of the hedge was a lovely big field. During the day, children would play there, but at night, when the children were safely tucked up in bed, the field belonged to the animals. There were some nice mice, voles and moles, a shrew or two, but sadly for Horace, no rabbits. He could see there had once been rabbits living there, because they had left empty holes in the ground where they had built their homes, called burrows. But although Horace waited patiently near the entrance to several of these burrows, no rabbits ever appeared. Until one day, a new family of rabbits made their home on the field. A building site had sprung up near their old home, and as soon as they saw the diggers and cranes moving in, they knew they would have to look for somewhere else to live. The first field they tried, the grass was simply too short to nibble. The second field had no trees to play hide and seek around. But the third field, the field at the bottom of Horace's garden, had both grass and trees. And so the rabbit family moved in. Mr. and Mrs. Rabbit and all their many children, including two little twin baby rabbits called Molly and Millie. They were all delighted with their new home. "Good location," said Mr. Rabbit. "Lots of space," said Mrs. Rabbit. "And look at all those trees to play hide and seek around," squealed Molly and Millie excitedly. All in all, it was perfect. But of course, they didn't know about Horace. And Horace too was delighted when he saw rabbits had moved into the field. He stopped still and stared for a moment, couldn't believe his eyes. And then he was off. He chased them along the hedgerows, under the trees, across the grass. It was Molly or Millie who saw him first. Look out, there's a cat about," she cried, and they all rushed back to the burrow and only got there just in time. And after that, because he knew they were there, Horace would wait for them to come out, and they couldn't come out to play until he had gone back home. They had to also make sure that they were back in their burrow before he came out again, and really it was quite a nuisance. "Oh, crumbly carrots," said Mr. Rabbit crossly. "What are we going to do about that cat?" One night, Mummy and Daddy were standing at the window looking out across the field. They were comforting the baby, who was having difficulty going off to sleep. And they saw Horace streaking across the grass, chasing the rabbits. "Oh, broken beer bottles," said Daddy crossly. "That's our naughty Horace. What are we going to do about that cat. I suppose we'll just have to keep him inside, said Mummy, and after that Horace was not allowed out, and the door was kept firmly shut at all times. Until, late one afternoon, Mummy went out to bring in the baby, who had been having a sleep outside and had woken up very hungry, and she left the door open. Horace saw his chance. Quick as a flash he was through the door, down the garden, over the hedge, onto the field, and chasing the rabbits along the hedgerows, under the trees, across the grass. The rabbits had been used not to seeing him, and they got a bit braver. And Molly and Milly only just made it back to the burrow because their legs were shorter than the other rabbits. "Oh, crumbly carrots," said Mr. Rabbit. "What are we going to do about that cat?" Mummy and Daddy too were very cross when they saw Horace was missing. "He's snuck out," said Mummy. "Soggy sponge cakes, what are we going to do about that cat?" "I know," said Daddy. "I'll build a fence. I'll build a fence in the garden so high that no cat can get out." And so when Horace came back, they went out into the garden, and Daddy got some long planks and his hammer and nails, and he built a high fence right around the garden. "There," he said proudly when he had finished, "he won't get out now." And so they went back into the house, leaving Horace alone in the garden. When he was all alone, Horace went over to the corner of the garden where there was a small trampoline that someone had brought for when the baby got bigger. He looked at it for a moment and then jumped up and began bouncing, gently at first, and then harder and harder. Higher and higher and higher he went until, whoop, suddenly he had bounced right up onto the top of the fence. And from there it was easy to slide down the other side, go over the hedge, and be back in the field chasing the rabbits, along the hedgerows, under the trees, across the grass. And this time they only just got back and shut the door of their burrow before he got his paw inside. "Oh, crumbly carrots," said Mr. Rabbit crossly, "what are we going to do about that cat?" That morning, when Horace was making his way home, up over the hedge and over the fence, onto the trampoline and back up the garden, he felt the first pitter-patter of raindrops beginning to fall, and by the time he woke up from his sleep, it was really raining very hard indeed. Horace did not much like rain. It made his fur sort of wet and uncomfortable and kind of sticky up, and he knew he would just have to stay inside until it stopped. Now in Wales, that can take a long time because we get a lot of rain, and Horace just had to stay inside for nearly a week until it stopped. But at last it did. The sun came out, and that night Horace was back on the field, waiting to chase the rabbits along the hedgerows, under the trees, across the grass. Only this time something felt a bit different. The heavy rainfall had turned the field into a sea of mud and muck, and it was difficult to see where to put your paws. The rabbits were light on their feet and knew their way home, and got home very well this time. But Horace was so excited he didn't look where he was going, and next thing you know, poof, he had fallen down into one of the burrows built by the rabbits long, long ago. He tried to get up by pushing his paws at the top of the burrow and pushing himself out, but the rain had made the sides of the burrow so slippery he couldn't, and he felt he was stuck. "Oh dear," he said, "I think I'm stuck here for ever and ever. I can't get out." And he began to wail piteously. "Meow, meow, help me out, meow, I'm stuck." When the sun had come out earlier, Mrs. Rabbit had opened one of the little round windows in the burrow, and now, faintly on the breeze, she thought she could hear a faint high-pitched squealing sound. "I wonder what that is," she said. "I can hear it too," said Mr. Rabbit. "I'll go and have a look." So he went out at the entrance of his burrow, followed the sound, and very soon saw Horace stuck fast at the entrance of one of the old burrows. "Ha!" said Mr. Rabbit. "Not running so fast now, are you?" "Oh, please," said Horace, "help me out. I'm stuck in this hole. I can't get out." Said Mr. Rabbit. "I don't see why I should. You've caused me and my family nothing but trouble these past few weeks, chasing us around the field." "Oh, please," said Horace, "please get me out. If you don't, I'll be stuck here forever and ever and ever." "Well," said Mr. Rabbit, "if you promise never to chase us again." "Oh, I will," said Horace. "I promise." And so Mr. Rabbit held out his paws for Horace to grab, and he pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled, and there was a whoop sound, and Horace flew out onto the grass safely. "Oh, thank you," he said, all muddy fur and wobbly legs. "Thank you for saving me." "That's all right," said Mr. Rabbit, "but remember what you promised." "Oh, yes," said Horace, "I remember, and I promise I will never chase rabbits again." And you know what? He never did. Horace was a lovely little cat, but he had some naughty habits, one of which was sadly that he was always chasing rabbits. He chased them through the field all night, until down came the rain. Then Horace got stuck in the mud and the muck, and he never chased rabbits again. Wasn't he a naughty little cat? I hope you enjoyed that story. That's all for now. See you next time. Hasta luego!